Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck and I get to travel far country. Today you can see I'm going to Japan with a very, very special story. My guest, meet Grace Emori. How do you do? Welcome to Better Life
Bernie.
TV.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
So what is the connection with this beautiful lady from Japan?
My mother, that's my mom. She was born in 1912 in Japan and immigrated to the United States in 1923, so she was about 12 years old when she came over.
What a courageous thing to come across the Pacific. Did she ever tell you stories about the ship?
No, she never discussed their sojourn across, but she left Japan right after the Great Kanto earthquake, which happened in 1923, and it decimated the area around Tokyo. About 100,000 people died in that earthquake, and it had a Richter scale of, I think, 7.3. And
that makes San Francisco look like a little earthquake.
Yes, it was horrendous. And her parents had immigrated to the U.S. a few years before that and were living in Hayward, California, and they had started a laundry and cleaning business. They left her brother and her in Japan with an aunt, and when that earthquake happened, of course, the father became very concerned for their welfare, so he came right over to Japan and got them and brought them to the U.S.
You say right over, just a simple little airplane flight over to...
Yeah. Unfortunately, things like that didn't exist at that time. So it would have been a boat trip. A boat trip. I'm not sure how many days that took, but I'm sure many, many days.
Your grandparents, did you know them?
Yes, because they were living in Hayward when we were born, so we did get to know them.
Now, but this is an American kid, right? Your
my
dad?
father, yes. He was born in 1907 in a town just outside of Davis, California. So he's a American-born citizen of the United States.
But your mother's naturalized citizen?
Yes, she was naturalized after 1952, when Japanese who were not born in the U.S. were finally allowed to become citizens. So she studied. I remember her going to classes and studying so that she was able to pass the test and become an American citizen.
Did you get to go to the swearing-in?
We did not go. They left us kids at home. And so Mom and Papa went to that ceremony.
In San Francisco?
No, it was in Los Angeles. We were living in Southern California by that time. Well,
between the story of their wedding and between the story of Los Angeles is really what I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
Because you were born.
Yes.
How many kids in the family?
There's four of us.
An older sister?
Yes, older sister Helen. And then two younger brothers, Walter and David.
And so here are a young family, mother, father, 4 kids.
Right.
And 1942, or was it 41, that trouble started?
Things started, well, with the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. That impacted our family tremendously.
Now, what was the first thing you remember about, I mean, you're just a tiny little girl.
About 4 years old. So, yeah, my memory is not all that great, and I see things from the perspective of a very young child. But we were living in the San Joaquin River Delta area. That's outside of Stockton, California. My father was working in a big farm. It was the Roscoe Zuckerman farm, which exists today. Still, it does, and it's in the islands through the delta, and they were growing potatoes and asparagus as their main crops. So he was working away as a farmer on this big farm when all of this happened, And then President Roosevelt signed what is called Executive Order 9066.
Which says, in essence,
that people who are members of a racial group that was part of the sort of the Axis powers were not to be allowed in certain areas, and the areas of sort of military sensitive areas. So of course the Japanese many of them were living along the West Coast. So it was the 3 West Coast states that were considered areas where people who were thought to be possible threats to the security of the United States were moved from that area.
Now, so you're telling me about a American-born man with a wife and 4 children,
right,
who've never done a thing wrong in their whole life. Well, you know, maybe that's an exaggeration because he wasn't perfect, but in the eyes of the law, he'd never done a thing. So what happened next?
Well, we were all forcibly removed from our homes. So the Pearl Harbor happened in December of '41. The executive order occurred in February of '42. And within just a few days of that, then we were pulled from our homes and we were taken to what they call an assembly center. And the assembly centers were usually the fairgrounds in that area, and the horse stalls were then made into little living quarters for each of the families. So altogether, 110,000 Japanese, people of Japanese ancestry, whether they were citizens or immigrants, called aliens, were removed during that time. About 2/3 of the people who were moved were native-born Japanese. So they were, I mean, they were American-born Japanese
You're talking
citizens.
about your father, your brothers, 2 brothers, and 2 girls.
Yes.
And for no reason whatsoever, the farmer was...
No reason other than being of Japanese ancestry.
Well, what did they must have told you what they packed. How was it that, I mean, how in the world could your mom have done this?
Well, it's basically what you could carry. So you packed a suitcase, and whatever you could carry was what you were permitted to take.
Well, but you had baby brothers.
Yes,
I mean, they had to have diapers.
That's right. Well, you know, we reused diapers in those days. You know, we just had cloth, and then they were washed, and then they were reused. So we didn't have these fancy disposable things that take up a lot of space.
The fact that the Emori family name is well known in Southern Oregon, and your mother and father have been residents here for many, many years. Your brother's been in medical practice for what, 30 years
About
and
30
more?
years, yes.
Your sister-in-law has been active in church work, your brother-in-law in the medical, do you call societies here in Southern Oregon. What must it have been like 50 or 30 years ago, or when did your folks come here? What was Southern Oregon like for them?
Well, they came in the late 70s, so might have been almost 1980 when they came. And so that was quite a few years removed from the turmoils of World War II and the move to the internment camp, which was Arkansas. So we were moved, taken by train from the Assembly Center, which was the San Joaquin County Fair racetracks.
You mean your mother made a bedroom and a living room out of a horse stall?
Yes, that was at the Assembly Center. So we
For how
all had
long were you there?
I'm not sure exactly how, but it was a few months.
And you're a little 4-year-old.
Little kids running around, I'm sure. And my youngest brother was just a few months old. and then Walter was like 2 and I was 4, and then my oldest sister was 6. So we're about 2 years apart. And then we were moved to Arkansas, and that's where we stayed for a little over 3 years.
What was it like in Arkansas?
Well, they very quickly put up a camp, and it's called Roar. So this was the Roar camp. There were 10 camps that were built around the country, and so we were sent to the easternmost camp, and it was located just west of the Mississippi River, and just north of the Mississippi line. So it was still in Arkansas, but it was just north of the Mississippi line.
Now that might have been beautiful, no?
It was swampland. So they built these camps on swampland, at least the Roar camp. The other camps were located in some of the most remote parts of the United States, so sort of way out of the way.
I know we had one here in Tule Lake.
Yes.
That's where some of the people have gotten the wood for their house because it was built there and then torn down.
Right.
But now, when swampland sounds scary to me.
Yes, well, I remember hanging over a bridge looking at the water moccasins swimming, down there. But what I remember, and this is a 4-year-old's memory, so it's not, all that clear, but I kind of remember the barbed wire fence around the camp, and then there were these sentry towers that were located around with soldiers with guns standing there watching us down below.
Like
to
this
make sure
4-year-old is going to do some sabotage.
Or escape or do something really awful, I guess. So that was really very scary to us as small children to see this kind of thing.
Well, now, how long did that last?
Not very long. I think they saw that the people were not going to do any violence and were not going to try to escape. So that came down pretty soon.
They no longer guarded you.
No.
Now, what did you do for food? What did Mom do?
Well, there were mess halls. The camp was divided into blocks, and each block had like 14 or 15 barracks. So the barracks looked very much like the Army barracks that we're all familiar with. And each family was given a room in the barrack. So there were like 4 different rooms in each barrack. The rooms were about 500 square feet big.
For a family of 6?
For a family of 6. And they allowed families of 8 people to be in this 500 square feet room, but then we went to our meals in a mess hall, and then there were separate toileting and bathing facilities in another room.
So now, here Mom is with 4 little kids. I just would love, I got to meet your mother and your father.
That would have been great. We lost them about 2 years ago.
Their home is in Jacksonville,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And I knocked on the door one time and got to meet them.
Oh, you did?
And of course, lots of us have met your brother because we've had aches or pains that took us to the rheumatologist, right? When your mother and father, were you raised as, were chopsticks part of your growing up and all these little Japanese cutesy things, were those part of, here's modern chopsticks. They've even got a clothespin, but this one my brother makes for a restaurant for his grandkids. What about you and chopsticks?
I call those training chopsticks, like training wheels. But for most Japanese children, they would go ahead and just learn how to use the regular chopsticks like that.
I can't.
You're pretty good at it, actually.
Oh, thank you.
You've got the right moves.
The bowl is made to hold your chopsticks. I think it's very clever, even the ends of them.
Well, actually, I think this is an American artist concept of what Japanese bowls would look like. It's actually quite clever, but...
Oh, bust my bubble. Now, the family, you weren't fed Japanese food in these camps, were you? I mean, I've heard about the one in Los Angeles where they served food that was of inferior quality and everyone got sick. But
well, there would be outbreaks once in a while from
dysentery,
foods that perhaps were not refrigerated properly or that kind of thing. But you know, this was a wartime, and everybody was suffering. If you recall that there were these shortages of food, and you had to have these rationing tickets and things like that to get your food. So you know, I think that we were treated pretty well in the camps. We were not mistreated at all, I think, and the only thing is that we lost our freedoms, that we were just told that you have to move out of your homes, and this is where we're going to put you during the interim period.
I want to weep, folks. Yeah. I want to weep because my freedom's so important to me, and not even one day have I had my freedom taken from me. I think of your mother and your father. Let's get acquainted with these beautiful people, because they are, this is the famous picture, right?
Yes.
And tell me about Grandpa.
This is Grandpa Aso, and he was my mother's dad. And then the two boys are my cousins. So these are his grandsons. And they lived in Hayward. So that's where they were when the war broke out. And this picture was taken by Dorothea Lange, who is one of the best known photographers during the Depression era. And if I showed you some of the photographs that she took, you will recognize them immediately. And so, so she took this picture of Grandpa and the two boys waiting for the truck to come to pick them up from their home. And you can see that they didn't have a lot of things with them. Grandpa has his books wrapped up in a little newspaper, and apparently that was the thing that was most precious to him.
Now, his book might have been what?
It's hard to tell. I really don't know. He was not a Christian at that time, so I don't know.
This is a famous picture. It's been on TV. It's been in the news, in books.
In books. It's in the Smithsonian, and it has appeared in many places. It's on the side of a wall in Little Tokyo in Japan. So outside, if you look, it's there permanently on a wall.
These are and this is your family? This was
Mom and Papa and us four kids sitting on the porch on our barracks.
This is your barrack?
That was our barrack.
How did they heat it? How did they, I mean, what was it like? Do you have any memory?
I think there were space heaters that were used.
You were 4 when you went into internment camp? Is that what you call it?
That's the term.
The polite term. We don't say concentration camp.
No, no. But some people would like to use that term, but I think that maybe internment camp. Concentration camp, you think in terms of the Jewish Holocaust, which was very severe.
In speaking with the Emoris, I am deeply moved by their sense of forgiveness and their love for this country. It's taken you to a lot of places. Why not tell me this story?
Well, that picture was taken of our family in front of the White House, and that was in 1988 when President Reagan signed what was called the Civil Rights Act of 1988. And this was when the United States government formally apologized for the removal of Japanese from the West Coast and placed them into these camps. And then also at that time, each person who was interned was awarded $20,000. This person had to be alive at that time, so
Okay,
it was not everybody, but
how many people in your family were still alive in that year?
Well, for us, we were all alive, so all 6 of us went to the signing. That was a real privilege to be there, and then also
President
Reagan
invited you to come and say, "I'm sorry. As a country, we are all sorry."
Yes.
What we did.
Yes.
Now, that I went saw the military hat, and I went, "Excuse me, is there a part of you I don't know anything about? Please tell me about." Were you the Navy?
Well, career-wise, I worked for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta as an epidemiologist for 26 years. And when you work there, you can either work as a civil servant, or for certain people who are in the health professions, they have the option of going to what we call the Commission Corps. So I was part of the Commission Corps, and so I was an officer in the U.S. Public Health Service.
Should I salute? What's this official title? When you retired, you were a...
Well, my rank was Navy captain. So, you know, I was an epidemiologist. So that's what I see myself as.
Now, just explain epidemiologist.
Okay. Well, epidemiology is the study of usually disease conditions in populations. You know, most of the time when you have a caregiver, they treat one person. It's
right.
a one-on-one. Well, those of us who are in epidemiology study diseases in groups of people. So, of course, it started out with things like studying communicable diseases.
Sure.
So we want to see, you know, what is the epidemiology of polio or salmonella, that kind of thing. So it started from there, but epidemiology can look at the problems with automobile accidents. You know, what is it what are the risk factors for automobile
what in
accidents?
common do all these... Now, your job kept you there in the South again. I mean, did that feel like home, Mississippi River and all?
Interesting. I hadn't really thought about that much. Papa and I stopped at the Roar camp when he drove me across country when I took the job in Atlanta. And so we were able to stop and see the camp. There's not much of it left, but it was interesting, at least, to see as an adult what the place looked like.
Can you folks believe the forgiveness that we're hearing? It's such an incredible story. Mm. What about Papa's reaction there?
Well, you know, Papa went through a lot through this. You know, and I think the reaction which really was most telling was that right after the signing of this bill by President Reagan in 1988, he was interviewed on Tom Brokaw's, or at least it aired on Tom Brokaw that night, and he just wept.
Tom Brokaw?
Well, no, my father.
Your father,
Tom
in
Brokaw
this interview,
that's right,
was moved to tears.
He was moved. He was moved by this. I mean, he was moved, I think, remembering, but he was also moved by the signing of the bill. You know, I mean, really, to think that the United States would really have the courage to say, we apologize for this.
Let's talk about what came with that apology. Something really significant came your family's way. They didn't just say, I'm sorry, they handed you a check.
Yes, yes.
You and your little brothers and your mother and your father, all of these people. And so I could ask you, what did you do with all that money?
Right. Well, you know, we saw this money as really something being very sacred, something very special. So we collected all this money, and we contributed it to Loma Linda University, where my parents worked for many years and where my sister was the dean of the School of Nursing at that point. And so we started a scholarship. It's called the Emori Endowment for the School of Nursing. And it has provided a number of scholarships for the students there. And yeah, it has been wonderfully satisfying.
Education's been a way out of that asparagus field, right?
Oh, absolutely. And for my parents, that was always a given, that we would go to school, we would go to college, we would go to graduate school, professional school, and that they would support us in any way that they could.
Our time's nearly up, but I want you to tell me about this bicycle rack.
Yeah. Well, we call this a tandem. Now, I'm not sure that that is really the right name for it, but it's something that is placed on the over the back fender of a bicycle.
And what sat on?
What sat on that was each of my brothers. So Helen was the oldest, so she had Walter as a passenger, and then I had a bike, and David was my passenger, and we pedaled our bikes to the Pomona Junior Academy church school, which was about a mile away from our home.
Your dad was working for whom at the time?
He was working at Beasley Farms, which was owned by the College of Medical Evangelists.
And the Kellogg's
And
originally.
the Kellogg family was the donors of this land.
I want to thank you so very much. Please come back and finish these stories. I love them.
Thank you.
I'm Bernie Martin Beck saying bye for now.